4 years, no one knew the secret that could shatter Alexander Drake's billion-dollar empire. Not his board of directors, not the financial press that tracked his every move, not even the socialites who whispered about his cold heart at Manhattan's most exclusive gatherings. But tonight, everything changed. Tonight, one woman walked into a charity gala with 2 children who looked exactly like him, and the carefully constructed walls of his empire began to crumble. The chandelier light caught the shock in his steel-gray eyes as recognition hit like lightning. 7 years of silence, 7 years of buried secrets, 7 years of pretending that one night hadn't changed everything forever. But there they were, standing just 20 feet away from him, 2 perfect little faces that mirrored his own with stunning, undeniable precision. This is Gilded Hearts, where we dive deep into the stories that remind us that even the most powerful among us are still human, still vulnerable, still capable of making choices that haunt them for decades. Tonight, we uncover what happens when the baby she chose over love becomes the twins that change everything. When the woman he abandoned returns not as a memory, but as a force of nature holding the future he never knew existed. Before we dive into this incredible journey of love, sacrifice, and shocking revelations that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about loyalty and redemption, tell us, where are you watching from tonight? Are you curled up in bed in London, grabbing coffee before work in New York, or maybe watching the sunrise from somewhere beautiful in Australia? Drop your city in the comments below, because we love seeing this incredible community that spans the globe, all of us connected by our shared fascination with the complexity of the human heart. And if you love stories that make your heart race, stories that leave you questioning everything about love and loyalty, stories that remind you that life is far more dramatic than any fiction we could ever imagine, then smash that subscribe button right now. Trust me when I say you won't want to miss what happens next. This story has twists that will leave you breathless, moments that will make you believe in second chances, and an ending that will stay with you long after you've turned off your screen. Subscribe, like, and share this video, because together, we can reach more beautiful minds like yours, minds that understand that the most powerful stories aren't the ones we read in books or see in movies. They're the ones that could happen to any of us. They're the ones that remind us that behind every fortune, every empire, every carefully polished public image, there are real people making impossible choices, living with unimaginable consequences, and sometimes, just sometimes, finding their way back to love. 7 years ago, Isabella Reyes made the hardest choice of her life. She was 24 years old, standing in the penthouse of the man she thought she would spend forever with, carrying news that should have brought joy but instead brought devastation. She chose her unborn child over the billionaire who demanded she make that choice. She walked away from silk sheets and candlelit dinners, from whispered promises and a world of unimaginable luxury, carrying nothing but her dignity and the precious life growing inside her. Tonight, we'll discover if that choice, that moment of incredible courage and heartbreaking sacrifice, was worth it all. We'll see what happens when the past refuses to stay buried, when fate orchestrates a reunion that no one saw coming, and when 2 innocent children become the bridge between a love that was lost and a future that might still be possible. But first, let me tell you about the woman who changed everything, the woman who proved that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is walk away, even when your heart is begging you to stay. Isabella Reyes was 24 when fate first whispered her name, though she had no idea the universe was about to turn her quiet, carefully planned life completely upside down. Picture her, if you will, petite yet graceful, moving through the world with a kind of understated elegance that doesn't demand attention but somehow always receives it. Her warm brown eyes held depths that spoke of wisdom beyond her years, and her hair spilled like black ink down her back, catching light in ways that made strangers turn for second glances on busy New York sidewalks. But Isabella had never been one to notice the attention. She was too focused, too determined, too grounded in the reality of where she came from to get lost in superficial admiration. Her world had always been small but rich with love. She was the daughter of Maria Reyes, a third-grade teacher who spent her evenings grading papers by lamplight and her weekends volunteering at the community center, and Carlos Reyes, a nurse who worked double shifts at the county hospital and still found energy to coach Little League on Sunday mornings. Their modest 2-bedroom house in Queens was filled with the kind of warmth that money can't buy. Family photos crowded every surface, report cards were celebrated like Nobel Prizes, and Sunday dinners were sacred events where 3 generations would squeeze around a table meant for 4, sharing stories and dreams in rapid-fire Spanish and broken English. Isabella learned early that love wasn't measured in square footage or designer labels, but in the way her father still brought her mother flowers every Friday, even after 26 years of marriage, and in the way her mother would slip extra money into Isabella's backpack with notes that said, "For something special, Mija." Education was the golden ticket in the Reyes household, the one thing that could lift their daughter higher than they had ever dared to climb. Isabella's parents worked overtime, saved every penny, and sacrificed vacations and new clothes so their brilliant daughter could attend the best schools, could chase the dreams they had never been positioned to pursue. When the acceptance letter arrived from Columbia University, along with a full academic scholarship, Maria cried for 3 days straight. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming joy of watching her daughter's future unfold like a flower reaching toward the sun. Columbia was a different universe for Isabella. Walking across that pristine campus, surrounded by students who spoke casually about their family's summer homes in the Hamptons and their spring breaks in Europe, Isabella felt the weight of the divide between her world and theirs. But she had something that money couldn't teach: hunger. She was hungrier than any of them, more determined, more focused on making every opportunity count. While her classmates partied in expensive bars, Isabella studied in the library until it closed. While they networked at exclusive events, Isabella worked part-time jobs to help support her family and save for her future. Her business degree came with highest honors, but more importantly, it came with an internship opportunity that would change everything. Drake Enterprises, one of the most powerful investment firms in the country, was offering a coveted position to one exceptional student. The competition was fierce, filled with candidates whose family connections opened doors before they even had to knock. But Isabella's interview was flawless, her passion undeniable, her intelligence blazing bright enough to cut through any prejudice about her background. The morning she walked through the gleaming glass doors of the Drake Enterprises building for the first time, Isabella felt like Alice stepping through the looking glass. The lobby stretched upward for what seemed like forever, all marble and steel and the kind of quiet that only comes with serious money. Women in designer suits clicked across the floor on heels that cost more than Isabella's monthly rent, while men in perfectly tailored suits discussed deals that could buy and sell entire companies before lunch. Isabella's internship was supposed to be a learning experience, a chance to observe how the financial elite operated, to network and build connections that might serve her well in her future career. She approached it with the same methodical determination that had carried her through everything else, arriving early, staying late, absorbing every detail like a sponge. She was polite but professional with her colleagues, friendly but focused, determined to prove that she belonged in this rarefied air despite her humble beginnings. What Isabella didn't expect, what she couldn't have prepared for, was him. Alexander Drake was 31 years old and commanded attention the moment he entered any room, not because he demanded it, but because power simply radiated from him like heat from a flame. He was tall, easily 6'3", with a kind of broad shoulders that suggested strength earned through discipline rather than genetics. His jawline was sharp enough to cut glass, and his dark hair was always perfectly styled, never a strand out of place even during the most intense board meetings. But it was his eyes that truly set him apart, piercing blue like winter sky, eyes that seemed to see straight through whatever facade a person might be wearing. To the rest of the world, Alexander was the brilliant CEO who had transformed his father's already successful company into a global empire worth billions. He was ruthless in negotiations, calculating in his business decisions, and utterly uncompromising when it came to results. Financial magazines featured him on their covers with headlines like the Ice King of Wall Street and the Billionaire Who Never Blinks. At charity galas and society events, he was photographed with supermodels and heiresses, but always alone, always untouchable, always maintaining the carefully constructed image of a man who needed nothing and no one. But reputation and reality, as Isabella would discover, were not always the same thing. The first time she really saw him, was during a late evening in October when most of the building had emptied out for the night. Isabella was still at her desk, reviewing financial reports for a presentation the next morning, when she heard footsteps in the hallway. She looked up to see Alexander walking past her cubicle, his suit jacket slung over his shoulder, his tie loosened, looking more human than the magazine photographs had ever captured. He paused when he noticed her, those piercing blue eyes taking in the scene, the young intern surrounded by stacks of papers, empty coffee cups littering her desk, determination etched into every line of her posture. For a moment, something flickered across his face, something that looked almost like recognition, though they had never spoken before. "Working late," he observed, his voice carrying a hint of curiosity beneath its commanding tone. "The Richardson portfolio needs to be perfect for tomorrow's presentation," Isabella replied, not bothering to hide her exhaustion but meeting his gaze steadily. "Mr. Patterson says attention to detail is what separates the successful from the mediocre." Alexander studied her for another moment, and Isabella felt something shift in the air between them, some invisible current that made her heart beat just a little faster. "Patterson's right," he said finally. "But perfection at the cost of your health isn't sustainable. There's a difference between dedication and self-destruction." It was such an unexpected comment from the man known for his relentless drive that Isabella blinked in surprise. "I appreciate the advice, Mr. Drake, but I'm fine. Really." Something that might have been a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Alexander," he corrected. "And you're Isabella Reyes, the intern everyone's been talking about." The fact that he knew her name, that people had been talking about her, sent a thrill of pride through Isabella's chest. "Hopefully for good reasons," she managed to say, proud that her voice remained steady despite the way his presence seemed to fill the entire space around her desk. "The best reasons," he assured her, and this time the smile was unmistakable. "Finish up soon, Isabella. The building gets lonely after midnight." He walked away before she could respond, leaving behind only the faint scent of expensive cologne and the lingering impression that her carefully ordered world had just shifted on its axis in ways she couldn't yet understand. Over the following weeks, their encounters became more frequent. Alexander would find reasons to walk past her desk, to ask her opinion on minor matters, to engage her in conversations that started professional but somehow always veered into more personal territory. Isabella told herself it was mentorship, nothing more than a successful executive taking interest in a promising intern's development. But late at night, alone in her small apartment in Queens, she found herself replaying every word, every glance, every moment when his fingers had accidentally brushed hers while passing documents. The magnetic pull between them was undeniable, though both fought against it with everything they had. Alexander knew better than anyone the dangers of mixing business with pleasure, especially with someone who worked for him, someone whose career he could make or destroy with a single word. And Isabella knew the stories, the cautionary tales of young women who had confused professional attention with personal interest and paid the price with their reputations and their futures. But attraction, real attraction, doesn't follow the rules of logic or propriety. It builds like a storm on the horizon, slowly at first, then with increasing intensity until it becomes impossible to ignore. The first time Alexander kissed her, Isabella thought her heart might actually stop beating. They were alone in his office after another late night, reviewing quarterly projections, when she looked up to find him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch in her throat. The space between them seemed to shrink without either of them moving, until she could feel the warmth radiating from his body, could see the way his pupils had dilated until those blue eyes looked almost black. "This is a mistake," he whispered, even as his hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone with achingly gentle pressure. "I know," Isabella breathed, but she didn't pull away. She couldn't. Every rational thought in her head was screaming warnings, but her heart was singing an entirely different song. When his lips finally touched hers, soft and searching and absolutely perfect, Isabella understood for the first time in her life what people meant when they talked about chemistry, about connection, about the kind of attraction that could make intelligent people do incredibly stupid things. The kiss was everything she had dreamed it might be, and nothing like she had imagined at the same time. It was gentle and desperate, tender and hungry, promising everything and demanding nothing except this moment, this perfect, impossible moment. They broke apart breathing hard, staring at each other across a divide that had just become infinitely wider and impossibly narrow at the same time. "This can't happen," Alexander said, but his hand was still on her face, his thumb still tracing patterns on her skin that made her knees weak. "I know," Isabella repeated, but she was leaning into his touch like a flower turning toward the sun. "I'm your boss. You work for me. This could ruin everything you've worked for." "I know," she said again, and this time she stepped back, breaking the connection between them with an effort that felt like tearing her own heart in half. "You're right. We both know this is impossible." But impossible and inevitable, as they would both soon discover, are not mutually exclusive concepts. Their relationship began in secret, Stolen moments in empty conference rooms, late dinners that they both pretended were work-related, conversations that started about business and ended with revelations about dreams and fears and the kinds of intimate details that people only share when they trust someone completely. Alexander introduced Isabella to a world of silk dresses and candlelit dinners, of private cars and exclusive restaurants where maitre d's knew his name and his preferences without being told. But it wasn't the luxury that seduced Isabella, though she would be lying if she said she didn't enjoy the way a perfectly fitted dress made her feel, or the confidence that came with knowing she looked beautiful on the arm of one of the most powerful men in the city. What truly captured her heart were the moments when Alexander let his guard down, when the ruthless businessman disappeared and she caught glimpses of the man he might have been if he hadn't been born to carry the weight of empire on his shoulders. He told her about his childhood, about a father who had been brilliant but cold, more interested in building wealth than relationships. About growing up in a mansion that felt more like a museum than a home, where every surface was perfect and untouchable and no child's laughter had ever echoed through the halls. About the pressure that had been placed on his shoulders from the moment he could walk, the expectation that he would not only maintain the Drake legacy, but expand it beyond anything his ancestors had ever imagined. "Sometimes I wonder what it would have been like," he confessed one night as they lay in his penthouse bed, the city lights creating patterns on the ceiling above them. To be born ordinary. To have the luxury of making mistakes without consequences. To choose love over duty. To build something from nothing instead of inheriting everything. Isabella traced patterns on his chest with her fingertip, marveling at the vulnerability in his voice. "You could still choose differently," she whispered. "It's never too late to change course." Alexander caught her hand, bringing it to his lips to press a gentle kiss to her palm. "Could I? Sometimes I think the man you see when we're alone like this is just wishful thinking, Isabella. Maybe the ruthless businessman is all I really am." "That's not true," Isabella said with fierce conviction. "I've seen who you are when you think no one is watching. I've seen your kindness, your generosity, the way you care about people even when you pretend you don't. That's not wishful thinking, Alexander. That's truth." For 6 months, they lived in a bubble of stolen happiness, a secret world where titles and backgrounds didn't matter, where they could just be Alexander and Isabella, two people who had found something precious and rare in each other. Isabella told herself that love could conquer anything, that what they shared was strong enough to overcome any obstacle. She began to dream of a future where she didn't have to hide her feelings, where she could stand beside Alexander not as his secret but as his partner. Those dreams came crashing down on a cold December morning when Isabella realized her period was 2 weeks late. She stared at the pregnancy test in her tiny bathroom, watching as 2 pink lines appeared with devastating clarity. Pregnant. She was pregnant with Alexander Drake's child, and in that moment, her entire world shifted on its axis in ways she never could have imagined. The walk from her apartment to Alexander's office felt like a funeral march. Every step carried her further from the life she had been living and closer to a future she couldn't begin to predict. She had played out this conversation in her head a dozen times during the elevator ride up to the executive floor, but none of her rehearsed speeches seemed adequate for the magnitude of what she was about to reveal. Alexander looked up from his desk when she knocked, his face lighting up with the kind of genuine warmth he showed only to her. "Isabella, perfect timing. I was just thinking about lunch. There's this little Italian place I've been wanting to try." "Alexander, we need to talk," Isabella interrupted, her voice steadier than she felt. "It's important." Something in her tone made his smile fade, replaced by the kind of focused attention he usually reserved for crisis management. He gestured to the chair across from his desk, but Isabella remained standing, needing the mobility, the illusion of control that came with being on her feet. "What's wrong?" he asked, and Isabella could hear the genuine concern in his voice, the care that made this conversation even more heartbreaking than it already was. "I'm pregnant, Alexander." The words fell between them like stones into still water, creating ripples that would spread far beyond this moment, far beyond this room. Alexander went completely still, his face becoming a mask that Isabella recognized from board meetings and hostile takeovers, the expression he wore when he needed to process information without revealing his hand. The silence stretched between them, heavy with implications and unspoken fears, until Isabella thought she might scream just to break the tension. "How long have you known?" he asked finally, his voice carefully controlled, betraying nothing of what he might be feeling. I took the test this morning. Alexander, I know this isn't what we planned, but... Planned. Alexander's laugh was sharp, bitter, completely unlike any sound she had ever heard from him before. Isabella, nothing about this relationship has been planned. It's been 6 months of completely irresponsible behavior on both our parts. The clinical coldness in his voice hit Isabella like a physical blow, but she forced herself to stand straight, to meet his eyes even as her heart began to crack in her chest. Is that what you think this has been? Irresponsible behavior. Alexander stood, moving to the window that overlooked the city, his back to Isabella as he spoke. What I think doesn't matter now. What matters is dealing with the situation we've created. The situation? Isabella repeated, and now there was anger creeping into her voice, hot and protective and fierce. Is that what you're calling our baby? A situation to be dealt with. Alexander spun around, and for the first time since she had known him, Isabella saw something that looked like panic in his eyes. Isabella, be realistic. Do you have any idea what this will do to my reputation, to my company? The board of directors is already looking for any excuse to question my judgment. If they discover I've been having an affair with an intern, if they find out about a pregnancy. An affair. Isabella's voice cracked on the word. Is that what I am to you? Is that what these 6 months have meant? That's not what I meant, Alexander said, but his tone remained cold, calculated, the voice of a man solving a problem rather than a lover facing an unexpected future. Isabella, you're young, you're brilliant, you have an incredible career ahead of you. A baby right now would derail everything you've worked for. That's my choice to make, Isabella said firmly. And I'm telling you that I want this baby, Alexander. I want our baby. Alexander closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, Isabella saw something die in them, some last vestige of the man she had fallen in love with disappearing behind walls she had never seen him build before. You can't keep it, he said, the words falling like a death sentence. Isabella, if you love me, if what we've shared has meant anything to you, you'll end this pregnancy. It's the only rational choice. Isabella felt the world tilt beneath her feet, felt everything she had believed about their relationship, about his feelings for her, crumble like sand in her hands. You want me to get rid of our baby? I want you to think about your future. About our futures. A child right now would destroy everything we've both worked for. What about love? Isabella whispered, and she hated how broken her voice sounded, how desperate. I thought you loved me, Alexander. I thought we were building something real together. Alexander's face might have been carved from stone. Love doesn't pay bills, Isabella. Love doesn't build empires or protect legacies. Love is a luxury that people like us can't afford. The words hit Isabella like physical blows, each one carefully calculated to wound, to convince, to force her into the decision he had already made for both of them. She stared at him, this man she had given her heart to, this man she had trusted with her deepest secrets and her most vulnerable moments, and realized that she had never really known him at all. People like us, she repeated, and now her voice was gaining strength, fueled by a rage she had never felt before. You mean people like me, don't you, Alexander? The intern from Queens whose parents clean houses and work double shifts, who doesn't belong in your world of silk sheets and society galas. That's not what I meant, Alexander said again, but they both knew it was exactly what he meant. The ugly truth finally surfaced after months of pretending that their different worlds didn't matter. Isabella stood in that pristine office, surrounded by symbols of wealth and power that would never be hers, carrying the child of a man who was asking her to choose between her baby and his reputation, and felt something crystallize inside her chest. Strength. Purpose. The kind of fierce protective love that makes ordinary people capable of extraordinary things. I'm going to have this baby, she said quietly, and her voice carried the force of absolute certainty. With or without you, Alexander, I'm going to have our child and love them enough for both of us. Alexander's mask slipped for just a moment, and Isabella caught a glimpse of something that might have been regret, might have been pain, before his features hardened again into cold resolve. Then you're doing it alone, he said. I won't acknowledge the child, Isabella. I won't support you financially or emotionally or in any other way. If you make this choice, you're making it completely on your own. Isabella nodded, surprised by her own calmness, by the peace that had settled over her once the lines were drawn so clearly. "I understand," she said. "And I choose my baby." She turned to walk away, to leave behind the man who had shown her heaven and hell in the same breath, but his voice stopped her at the door. "Isabella." She turned back, hoping against hope for some sign of the man she had fallen in love with, some acknowledgement of what they were throwing away. "Clean out your desk today. Your internship is terminated immediately." It was the final cut, the last cruelty, the punctuation mark on the end of everything they had been to each other. Isabella nodded once, her chin held high despite the tears threatening to spill down her cheeks. "Goodbye, Alexander," she said, and walked out of his office, out of his building, out of his life, carrying with her nothing but her dignity and the precious life growing inside her womb. She had no idea, as she stood on the sidewalk outside Drake Enterprises with December snow falling around her like tears from heaven, that her choice would return to her 7 years later not as one child, but as two beautiful, brilliant children who would change everything she thought she knew about love, about forgiveness, and about the power of second chances. But Isabella had no idea that her choice, that moment of choosing love over luxury, choosing her unborn child over the man who had demanded she make that impossible decision, would return to her in ways she never could have imagined. What would you have done? Standing in that office, carrying new life, facing the man you thought you loved demanding you choose between your child and his world, would you have chosen love or your unborn baby? The answer would define not just Isabella's future, but the fate of everyone whose life would be touched by the twins who were about to change everything. The first cry pierced the sterile hospital air at 3:47 a.m. on a rainy Tuesday in April, followed moments later by a second, equally strong voice announcing its arrival to the world. Isabella Reyes, exhausted from 14 hours of labor, felt her heart expand in ways she never knew were possible as the nurse placed not one, but two perfect babies on her chest. Twins. She was having twins. 2 healthy babies, the doctor announced with a tired smile. A boy and a girl. "Congratulations, Miss Reyes." Isabella stared down at the 2 tiny faces, their skin still wrinkled and red from their journey into the world, and felt tears streaming down her cheeks. But it wasn't their perfect little fingers or their soft downy hair that took her breath away. It was their eyes. Even in those first moments of life, when they opened their eyes and looked up at her, Isabella saw the unmistakable piercing blue of their father, the same shade that had once made her believe in forever. "Mateo," she whispered, touching the face of her son, who had arrived first, already showing signs of the strong jawline that would mark him as a Drake even if he never carried the name. "And Marisol," she breathed, looking at her daughter, whose features were softer but no less determined, her tiny fist already gripping Isabella's finger with surprising strength. In that moment, lying in a hospital bed she could barely afford, looking at 2 children whose father had demanded she never bring them into existence, Isabella made a vow that would shape every decision for the next 7 years. "You will never feel unwanted," she promised them, her voice fierce despite her exhaustion. "You will never doubt that you are loved, that you are precious, that you are the best thing that ever happened to me. I will make sure of it, even if it kills me." It nearly did. The first year was a blur of sleepless nights, endless feedings, and the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that makes every simple task feel like climbing a mountain. Isabella's small apartment in Queens became a fortress of organized chaos, every surface covered with baby supplies she had bought secondhand or received from her mother's church community. The women from St. Teresa's had rallied around her with a kind of fierce maternal protection that transcends blood, bringing casseroles and hand-me-down clothes, and offers to babysit that Isabella was too proud to accept until desperation finally broke down her walls. Money was a constant worry, a shadow that followed her through every day and haunted every night. The little savings she had managed to accumulate during her time at Drake Enterprises disappeared within months, swallowed by formula and diapers and the million tiny expenses that come with raising not 1 but 2 infants. Isabella took the first job she could find, answering phones at a law office during the day while her mother watched the twins. But one job wasn't enough. Not when every month brought new bills and the twins were growing so fast they needed new clothes every few weeks. So Isabella added a second job, cleaning offices downtown in the evenings after her mother could take over baby duty. She would arrive home at midnight, catch a few hours of sleep, and be up again at dawn to feed the twins and get ready for another day at the law office. On weekends, she worked a third job, catering events for a small company that paid cash and didn't ask too many questions about her availability. There were nights when Isabella would stand in her tiny kitchen, heating bottles at 2 a.m. while the twins cried in their cribs, and wonder how she was going to make it through another day. Her back ached from bending over conference room tables with cleaning supplies. Her hands were raw from constantly washing dishes and changing diapers, and her eyes burned from the exhaustion that had become her constant companion. But then Mateo would stop crying the moment she picked him up, or Marisol would give her one of those gummy smiles that lit up her entire face, and Isabella would remember why she had made the choice she had made. These children, her children, were worth every sleepless night, every aching muscle, every moment of doubt. Isabella developed a routine that would have impressed military commanders in its precision and efficiency. She could change 2 diapers simultaneously, prepare bottles with her eyes closed, and rock both babies to sleep while balancing checkbooks and paying bills. Her movements became economical, purposeful, wasting not a single motion or moment. She learned to survive on 4 hours of sleep, to eat meals while standing, to find pockets of peace in the chaos of raising twins alone. The hardest moments came in the quiet spaces, when the twins were finally asleep and Isabella was alone with her thoughts. She would look at her children sleeping in their second-hand cribs and see Alexander in every line of their faces. Mateo had his father's determined chin, while Marisol had inherited those expressive eyebrows that could convey entire conversations without words. Sometimes Isabella would catch herself wondering what Alexander was doing, whether he ever thought about her, whether he had any idea that he had 2 beautiful children growing up just a borough away from his glittering penthouse. Those thoughts always led to a familiar ache, a grief she carried like a stone in her chest for the life they might have had, the family they could have been if Alexander had been brave enough to choose love over reputation. But Isabella had learned to channel that grief into determination, to transform heartbreak into fierce protective love for the children who needed her to be strong. As the twins grew from infants to toddlers, Isabella's life took on a different rhythm. Mateo proved to be the more adventurous of the 2, constantly exploring every corner of their small apartment with a kind of fearless curiosity that gave Isabella heart attacks on a daily basis. By 18 months, he had learned to climb onto chairs, open cabinets, and somehow find trouble in the most innocent situations. Marisol was more contemplative, preferring to sit and observe before acting, but when she decided she wanted something, she pursued it with a single-minded determination that reminded Isabella so much of Alexander it made her chest tighten. The twins spoke their first words within days of each other. Mateo's mama followed quickly by Marisol's more, which became her favorite word for everything from food to attention to bedtime stories. They learned to walk holding hands, supporting each other when one stumbled, developing the kind of unspoken communication that only twins understand. Isabella would watch them playing together in the living room and marvel at the bond they shared, the way they seemed to know what the other was thinking before words were even necessary. Meanwhile, across the city, Alexander Drake's empire continued to grow in ways that made headlines and broke records. The financial magazines that had once called him ruthless now used words like visionary and unstoppable. Drake Enterprises expanded into new markets, acquired smaller companies with surgical precision, and posted profits that made shareholders dizzy with greed. Alexander's name appeared on lists of the most powerful men in America, his photograph graced the covers of business journals, and his opinions on market trends moved stock prices with a single quote. But success, as Alexander was discovering, could be the loneliest achievement of all. His penthouse apartment, once a symbol of everything he had worked to build, felt more like a museum than a home. The rooms were perfect, sterile, filled with expensive art and furniture that no one ever used. He would stand at his floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the city lights and feeling utterly disconnected from the life pulsing below. Business dinners with potential clients left him empty, conversations that revolved around profit margins and market share feeling increasingly meaningless. Even his victories felt hollow, each new acquisition or successful deal adding to his wealth but subtracting from his sense of purpose. There were moments, usually late at night when the city was quiet and his defenses were down, when Alexander would find himself thinking about Isabella. He would wonder what she was doing, whether she had kept the baby, whether she ever thought about the months they had shared. These thoughts always came with a sharp pang of something that might have been regret, quickly suppressed and pushed away because regret was a luxury he couldn't afford. Alexander had become expert at compartmentalization, at separating his emotions from his business decisions, but Isabella had left cracks in his carefully constructed walls that he couldn't quite seal. Sometimes he would catch himself looking for her face in crowds, or his heart would skip when he saw a woman with long dark hair walking ahead of him on the street. He told himself it was nothing more than nostalgia, the natural tendency to romanticize a relationship that had been doomed from the beginning. The closest Alexander came to reaching out was on a December evening 2 years after Isabella had walked out of his office. He had been working late, as usual, when he found himself holding his phone with her number already dialed, his thumb hovering over the call button. For 10 minutes, he sat in his leather chair, staring at those numbers, imagining her voice, wondering what he would say if she answered. In the end, he deleted the number and threw himself back into work, but the moment haunted him for weeks afterward. What if she had kept the baby? What if he had a child somewhere in the city, a son or daughter who carried his DNA but would never know his name? The possibility followed him through board meetings and business dinners, a constant whisper in the back of his mind that no amount of success could silence. Alexander's reputation in business circles grew more fearsome with each passing year. He became known for his ability to remain utterly calm under pressure, to make decisions that others found impossible, to negotiate deals that left his opponents wondering how they had been so thoroughly outmaneuvered. But those closest to him began to notice subtle changes. His smile, never frequent, became even rarer. His patience for small talk disappeared entirely. He worked longer hours, took fewer vacations, and seemed to find genuine pleasure in nothing except the pure mechanics of building his empire. The women who had once vied for his attention found him increasingly cold and distant. Supermodels and socialites who had graced his arm at charity events discovered that beneath the polite facade, Alexander had become unreachable in ways that had nothing to do with wealth or status. He went through the motions of his social obligations, attending galas and fundraisers because his position demanded it, but anyone who looked closely could see that he was present in body only, his mind always somewhere else, focused on something no one else could see. By the time the twins reached their 5th birthday, Isabella had managed to achieve a precarious stability that felt like luxury after the chaos of their early years. She had found a better job as an administrative assistant at a small marketing firm, work that paid enough for her to quit the evening cleaning job and see her children for dinner most nights. They had moved to a slightly larger apartment, still in Queens but with 2 bedrooms so Matteo and Marisol could each have their own space, decorated with drawings they had made and toys Isabella had saved for months to afford. Matteo at 5 was all energy and mischief, the kind of child who could turn a simple trip to the grocery store into an adventure filled with questions about everything from why bananas were curved to how elevators knew which floor to stop on. He had his father's piercing blue eyes but Isabella's warm smile, and a laugh that could fill an entire room with joy. His favorite game was building elaborate structures with blocks and then creating dramatic stories about the people who lived inside, complete with voices and sound effects that kept Isabella entertained for hours. Marisol, 3 minutes younger but infinitely more serious, approached life with the methodical precision of a tiny scientist. She could spend entire afternoons arranging her dolls in elaborate tea parties, complete with conversations in both English and the Spanish she was learning from her grandmother. Her blue eyes, so like her father's, seemed to see everything, to catalog and analyze every detail of her world with an intelligence that sometimes startled Isabella with its intensity. She was the peacemaker when she and Matteo argued, the one who could find creative solutions to problems that left adults baffled. Both children had inherited their father's sharp intellect along with their mother's emotional intelligence, creating personalities that were both brilliant and deeply empathetic. They excelled in their pre-kindergarten classes, not just academically but socially, becoming the children that teachers described as natural leaders and classmates gravitated toward instinctively. Isabella watched her children grow with a mixture of pride and bittersweet recognition. Every day, she saw more of Alexander in their faces, in their gestures, in the way they approached problems with the same systematic thinking that had once made her fall in love with their father. Matteo had developed Alexander's habit of running his hand through his hair when he was thinking hard about something, while Marisol had inherited his ability to remain perfectly still and focused when something truly captured her attention. These similarities were both a gift and a constant reminder of what had been lost. Isabella would watch Matteo explain something to his sister with the same patient authority Alexander had once used in board meetings, or see Marisol tilt her head in contemplation exactly the way her father had when considering a complex business decision, and feel her heart ache with memories she couldn't quite bury. There were nights when Isabella would lie in bed, listening to her children sleep in the next room, and allow herself to imagine what might have been. What would their bedtime routine look like if Alexander were there to help? Would he read them stories, or would he be too busy with work? Would he see the same brilliance in them that she did, or would he view them as obligations, complications in his perfectly ordered life? These thoughts always led to the same conclusion. Her children were better off without a father who would see them as burdens rather than blessings. Isabella had given them something more valuable than wealth or status. She had given them the absolute certainty that they were loved unconditionally, that they mattered, that they were the center of someone's universe. As the twins approached their 7th birthday, Isabella began to relax into a sense of security she hadn't felt since before she had discovered she was pregnant. They had built a life together, the three of them, that was rich in love if not in material wealth. Matteo and Marisol were thriving in school, making friends, developing their own interests and personalities in ways that filled Isabella with fierce maternal pride. She had even begun to date occasionally, tentative coffee meetings with men who seemed kind and stable, though none had managed to capture her interest in any meaningful way. Isabella told herself she was being cautious because of her children, but deep down she knew the truth. No one could compare to the memory of Alexander, to the intensity and passion they had shared. It was an unfair standard, she knew, measuring every potential relationship against a love that had ultimately proven illusory, but her heart seemed incapable of settling for anything less than the all-consuming connection she had once felt. The invitation arrived on a Thursday afternoon in March, slipped under Isabella's office door by a messenger who disappeared before she could ask any questions. The envelope was heavy, expensive, the kind of cream-colored paper that spoke of old money and careful traditions. Isabella opened it with curious fingers, not recognizing the return address, and felt her breath catch as she read the elegant script inside. The Children's Hospital Foundation cordially invites you to attend our annual Spring Gala, an evening of dining and dancing to benefit pediatric cancer research. Saturday, April 15th, Grand Ballroom of the Plaza Hotel. Black tie optional. The invitation was signed by Rebecca Martinez, a name Isabella recognized from her days at Drake Enterprises. Rebecca had been a senior analyst, one of the few people who had shown Isabella genuine kindness during her internship. Attached to the invitation was a handwritten note. Isabella, I heard through the grapevine that you're working in marketing now. I thought you might enjoy networking at our fundraiser. It's for an amazing cause, and the guest list includes some of the city's most influential business leaders. It would be wonderful to catch up. RSVP by April 10th. Hope to see you there. Rebecca. Isabella stared at the invitation for long minutes, her mind racing through possibilities and complications. A charity gala at the Plaza Hotel was exactly the kind of high society event she had once dreamed of attending, back when she thought she might build a life in Alexander's world. Now it felt like stepping into a foreign country where she didn't speak the language or understand the customs. Her first instinct was to decline politely, to maintain the safe distance she had built between her current life and the glittering world that had once broken her heart. But something about the cause gave her pause. Pediatric cancer research. As a mother, she couldn't help but think about the families facing unimaginable challenges, about children fighting battles no child should have to fight. Isabella looked at her reflection in her computer screen, seeing a woman who had grown stronger and more confident over the past 7 years, who had built a life worth being proud of despite the obstacles she had faced. Maybe it was time to stop hiding from the world that had once intimidated her. Maybe it was time to prove to herself that she could attend an event like this not as Alexander Drake's secret lover, but as Isabella Reyes, successful professional and devoted mother. The decision to attend came suddenly, accompanied by a surge of determination that surprised Isabella with its intensity. She would go to the gala, not to reclaim a past that was gone forever, but to celebrate the woman she had become, the life she had built, the future she was creating for her children. Finding a dress proved to be more challenging than making the decision to attend. Isabella's closet contained professional attire suitable for her office job and casual clothes for chasing after 7-year-olds, but nothing appropriate for a black-tie charity event. After consulting with her mother and several female colleagues, Isabella found herself in a consignment shop in Manhattan, searching through racks of once expensive gowns looking for something that would make her feel confident without costing more than her monthly rent. The dress she finally chose was midnight blue silk, simple but elegant, with a fitted bodice and flowing skirt that made her feel like a more sophisticated version of herself. It had clearly been expensive once, though the consignment price made it affordable, and when Isabella tried it on in the shop's small dressing room, she was surprised by the woman who looked back at her from the mirror. 7 years of raising twins alone had given her a kind of quiet confidence that no amount of money could buy, and the dress seemed to highlight that strength rather than trying to create it artificially. The evening of the gala arrived with spring rain that turned Manhattan streets into rivers of reflected light. Isabella had arranged for her mother to babysit, a decision that required extensive negotiations with Matteo and Marisol, who couldn't understand why their mother was getting dressed up to go somewhere without them. "You look like a princess, Mama," Marisol declared, watching Isabella apply lipstick with the careful precision of someone who rarely wore makeup. "A working princess," Matteo added with the kind of practical wisdom that always made Isabella smile. "Like the ones in our books who saved their own kingdoms." Isabella knelt down to hug both children, careful not to wrinkle her dress or smudge her makeup. "I love you both more than all the stars in the sky," she whispered, their nightly ritual of affection that had become as essential as breathing. "More than all the fish in the ocean," they chorused back, completing the phrase that had been theirs since they were old enough to speak in full sentences. As Isabella's taxi pulled away from their apartment building, she caught sight of her children's faces pressed against the living room window, waving goodbye with the kind of enthusiasm that made her heart swell with love. Whatever happened tonight, whatever faces from her past she might encounter, her children would be waiting for her when she came home, ready to hear about her adventure in the grown-up world. The Plaza Hotel blazed with light against the rainy night, its facade elegant and imposing in ways that reminded Isabella why she had once felt so intimidated by Alexander's world. Guests streamed through the entrance in designer gowns and perfectly tailored tuxedos, their laughter and conversation creating a symphony of privilege and power that seemed to echo off the marble walls. Isabella paid her taxi driver and stepped out into the night, her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. She had imagined this moment dozens of times over the past weeks, but the reality was both more overwhelming and less frightening than her anticipation had suggested. She was no longer the uncertain intern who had once felt so out of place in these circles. She was a woman who had survived heartbreak and built a life worth living, and she belonged anywhere she chose to be. The grand ballroom was a masterpiece of old-world elegance, all crystal chandeliers and gold leaf details that caught the light and threw it back in dancing patterns across the walls. Round tables covered in crisp white linens filled the space, each centerpiece a work of art featuring flowers that probably cost more than Isabella spent on groceries in a month. A live orchestra played soft jazz from a stage at the far end of the room, while waiters in pristine white jackets moved through the crowd carrying trays of champagne and delicate hors d'oeuvres. Isabella accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and took a moment to orient herself in the crowd. The guest list was exactly what Rebecca had promised: influential business leaders, prominent socialites, and the kind of people whose names appeared regularly in the society pages of newspapers. Isabella recognized several faces from business magazines and news programs, people whose decisions shaped markets and influenced policy on a global scale. She spent the first hour reconnecting with Rebecca, who greeted her with genuine warmth and introduced her to colleagues and acquaintances with a kind of easy social grace that Isabella had always admired. The conversations were pleasant if not particularly meaningful, covering topics like market trends, charity work, and the mild gossip that seemed to fuel this level of society. Isabella found herself relaxing into the rhythm of the evening, remembering skills she had learned during her brief time in Alexander's world, the ability to make small talk and project confidence even when she felt uncertain. It was during the silent auction, while Isabella was examining a donated vacation package to Tuscany that she would never be able to afford, that she became aware of a sudden shift in the energy of the room. Conversation seemed to pause, heads turned toward the entrance, and she could feel a ripple of recognition moving through the crowd like a wave. Isabella looked up from the auction catalog, following the gaze of the other guests, and felt the world stop spinning on its axis. Alexander Drake stood in the ballroom entrance, scanning the crowd with those piercing blue eyes that had once seen straight through to her soul. He looked exactly as she remembered and completely different at the same time. Still tall, still commanding presence that made other people seem smaller simply by existing in the same space. His tuxedo was perfectly tailored, his dark hair still styled with precision, his jawline as sharp as it had been 7 years ago. But there was something else, something new in the set of his shoulders, the way he held himself slightly apart from the crowd even as people gravitated toward him. He looked successful, powerful, every inch the billionaire CEO his reputation proclaimed him to be. But he also looked empty. Hollow in ways that success couldn't fill, despite all the wealth and power he had accumulated in the years since Isabella had walked out of his life. Isabella's first instinct was to run, to slip out through the side exit and disappear into the night before he could see her. Her heart was pounding so hard she was certain everyone around her must be able to hear it, and her hands were shaking enough to rattle the champagne glass she was holding. 7 years of carefully constructed peace, 7 years of building a life that didn't include him, and suddenly she was right back to being the young woman who had loved him so desperately it nearly destroyed her. But then she felt a small hand slip into each of hers, imaginary but completely real in her mind, and remembered who she was now. She was Matteo and Marisol's mother, a woman who had chosen love over luxury and built something beautiful from the ruins of heartbreak. She was not the same person who had walked out of Alexander's office carrying nothing but her dignity and an unborn child. She was stronger now, older, wiser, and she had absolutely nothing to be ashamed of. Isabella straightened her shoulders and remained exactly where she was, determined not to let Alexander's presence rob her of the peace she had fought so hard to achieve. For several minutes, Alexander moved through the crowd accepting congratulations on recent business ventures and making the kind of polite conversation that charity events demanded. Isabella watched him work the room with the same smooth efficiency he had once brought to board meetings, remembering the way he could make anyone feel like the most important person in the room when his attention was focused on them. But then his gaze swept across the auction tables, and their eyes met across a ballroom full of people, and Isabella watched 7 years disappear in the space of a single heartbeat. Alexander went completely still, his conversation with a prominent city councilman forgotten mid-sentence, his champagne glass frozen halfway to his lips. For a moment, Isabella thought he might not recognize her, but the changes 7 years had wrought would be enough to let her remain anonymous in the crowd. Then his gaze dropped slightly, taking in the 2 small faces on either side of her, and Isabella realized with a shock that made her knees weak that Matteo and Marisol had followed her to the auction table despite her mother's instructions to stay with the other children in the hotel's supervised kids area. "Mama, this place is so fancy," Marisol whispered, her blue eyes wide as she took in the crystal chandeliers and elaborate floral arrangements. "It's like a castle. Can we bid on something?" Matteo asked with a kind of innocent enthusiasm that made Isabella's heart melt even in the midst of her panic. "I want to help the sick kids too." Isabella looked down at her children, so beautiful in their party clothes. Matteo in a small suit she had found at a consignment shop and Marisol in a pink dress that made her look like a tiny princess. They had somehow escaped their grandmother's supervision and found their way to the ballroom, drawn by curiosity and the kind of fearless confidence that only 7-year-olds possessed. When Isabella looked up again, Alexander was walking toward them, moving through the crowd with a kind of focused determination that had once made boardrooms fall silent. His face was a mask of controlled shock, but his eyes were blazing with an intensity that made Isabella's breath catch in her throat. People moved out of his way without thinking, recognizing power even when they couldn't identify its source, creating a clear path between Alexander and the family he was seeing for the first time. Isabella could feel the weight of dozens of gazes, could sense the curiosity and speculation beginning to ripple through the crowd as New York's elite recognized high drama unfolding in real time. Alexander stopped 3 feet away from them, close enough that Isabella could see the way his hands were trembling slightly, could observe the muscle working in his jaw as he struggled to maintain his composure. His gaze moved from Isabella's face to Matteo, then to Marisol, then back again, as if he was trying to solve an equation that didn't make sense. "Isabella," he said, and her name on his lips after 7 years of silence carried the weight of every unspoken word, every moment of regret, every night he had wondered what might have been different. "Alexander," she replied, proud that her voice remained steady despite the chaos of emotions swirling in her chest. But it was Matteo who broke the tension, looking up at the tall stranger with a kind of open curiosity that children brought to every new encounter. "Are you here for the sick kids too?" he asked, his small voice carrying clearly in the sudden quiet that had fallen around them. Alexander's carefully maintained composure cracked, just slightly, as he looked down at the boy who had his eyes, his jawline, his fearless approach to the world. "Yes," he managed to say, his voice rougher than Isabella had ever heard it. "I am." Marisol, more cautious than her brother but equally curious, studied Alexander with a kind of careful attention she usually reserved for puzzles and problems that required serious thought. "You look sad," she observed with a devastating honesty that only children could deliver. "Why are you sad at a party?" Isabella felt her heart stop as Alexander knelt down, bringing himself to the children's eye level, his expensive tuxedo forgotten as he came face to face with the son and daughter he had never known existed. "What are your names?" he asked, and Isabella could hear the wonder in his voice, the disbelief and recognition warring in every word. "I'm Matteo," her son announced with the confidence of a child who had never had reason to doubt his own worth. "And this is my sister Marisol. We're twins." "Twins," Alexander repeated, as if the word held meanings he was only beginning to understand. Isabella watched this first meeting between father and children with a mixture of terror and fascination, knowing that nothing would ever be the same again, that the careful life she had built was about to be turned upside down by forces she couldn't control. Alexander's champagne glass slipped from nerveless fingers, shattering against the marble floor in a cascade of crystal and golden liquid that seemed to echo through the suddenly silent ballroom. The sound snapped the attention of everyone around them back to the drama unfolding in their midst, but Alexander seemed oblivious to everything except the two small faces looking up at him with innocent curiosity. For the first time in his adult life, the unshakable Alexander Drake looked utterly undone. He rose slowly to his feet, his eyes never leaving the children's faces, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of 7 years of buried regret and dawning recognition. "They're mine, aren't they?" The question hung in the air between them like a bridge neither of them was certain they were ready to cross, while around them the cream of New York society held its collective breath, sensing that they were witnessing the kind of moment that would be whispered about in social circles for years to come. "Do you believe in fate? Do you think some meetings are written in the stars, that certain people are destined to find each other no matter how far they travel or how many years pass between them?" As Isabella stood in that glittering ballroom, her children's hands in hers and the man who had once been her entire world standing before them, she couldn't help but wonder if this reunion was always meant to happen, if all the pain and separation had been leading to this single, transformative moment when 3 separate lives would become forever intertwined. The question hung in the crystal-clear air of the Plaza Hotel ballroom like a blade suspended over everything Isabella had fought to build and protect for 7 years. Alexander's voice, barely above a whisper but carrying the weight of absolute certainty, had cut through the elegant chatter and classical music with devastating precision. "They're mine, aren't they?" Isabella felt every eye in their immediate vicinity turn toward them, felt the curiosity of New York's elite focusing on this moment of raw human drama unfolding amid the champagne and charity auction items. But all of that faded into background noise as she looked into Alexander's eyes and saw not the calculating businessman who had once demanded she choose between her child and his reputation, but a man coming face to face with the consequences of choices that had haunted him for nearly a decade. Matteo and Marisol, blissfully unaware of the adult complexities swirling around them, continued to study this tall stranger with a kind of open fascination children brought to everything new and interesting. Matteo had moved slightly closer to Alexander, drawn by some instinct he couldn't name, while Marisol maintained her characteristic caution, her small hand tightening around Isabella's fingers. "Mama," Marisol whispered, tugging on Isabella's dress with the persistence of a 7-year-old who sensed something important was happening but couldn't quite understand what. "Who is this man? Why does he look like Matteo?" The innocent observation hit Alexander like a physical blow, and Isabella watched his carefully maintained composure crumble in real time. His knees actually buckled slightly, and he reached out to steady himself against the auction table, his knuckles white where they gripped the edge. Isabella's maternal instincts, honed by 7 years of protecting her children from anything that might hurt them, flared to life with fierce intensity. Whatever Alexander was feeling, whatever emotions this reunion had stirred up in him, her priority was and would always be Matteo and Marisol. They didn't understand the complexity of their situation, didn't know that the man staring at them with such desperate intensity was the father who had never wanted them to exist. "We need to talk," Isabella said quietly, her voice carrying the steel that had gotten her through the hardest years of her life. "But not here. Not in front of them." Alexander nodded, seemingly incapable of speech, his gaze moving between the twins' faces as if he was trying to memorize every detail, every feature that marked them as his blood despite his absence from their lives. Isabella looked around the ballroom, acutely aware of the whispered conversations beginning to buzz around them, the sideways glances and barely concealed curiosity of people who recognized drama when they saw it. This was exactly the kind of scene Alexander had once been terrified would destroy his reputation, and the irony wasn't lost on her that his carefully guarded secret was about to become tomorrow's gossip in the most public way possible. "There's a private terrace through those doors," Alexander managed to say, gesturing toward an exit near the silent auction tables. "We can." He stopped, seeming to realize that "we" was no longer a word he could use casually, that he had forfeited the right to make assumptions about Isabella's willingness to include him in anything 7 years ago. Isabella nodded curtly. "Mrs. Martinez," she called to Rebecca, who was hovering nearby with a kind of concerned expression that suggested she was beginning to understand that this was more than a simple reunion between former colleagues. "Would you mind keeping an eye on Mateo and Marisol for a few minutes? They love talking about school, and they're very well behaved." Rebecca, clearly sensing undercurrents she didn't fully understand but recognizing a mother in need of help, smiled warmly at the twins. "Of course. I'd love to hear about what you're learning in 2nd grade." Isabella knelt down to her children's level, her heart pounding but her voice steady with a kind of calm authority that had guided them through everything from scraped knees to thunderstorms. "Mama needs to talk to this gentleman about some grown-up things for just a few minutes. Stay right here with Mrs. Martinez, okay? Don't wander off, and don't accept food from anyone except the waiters with the white jackets." "Is he in trouble?" Mateo asked with the kind of protective concern that made Isabella's heart swell with pride. Even at 7, her son had developed the instinct to watch out for the people he cared about. "No, baby," Isabella assured him, brushing his dark hair back from his forehead in a gesture that was as much for her comfort as his. "Just some things we need to discuss. I'll be right back." She kissed both children on their foreheads, breathing in the familiar scent of their shampoo and the faint sweetness that always seemed to cling to them no matter how thoroughly they washed their hands. These were her anchors, her reasons for every difficult choice she had made, and whatever happened in the next few minutes, nothing would change her fierce dedication to their well-being. The private terrace was a small oasis of calm in the midst of the glittering chaos, overlooking Central Park with a view that probably cost more per square foot than Isabella's entire annual rent. Spring rain continued to fall beyond the covered area, creating a curtain of privacy that separated them from the city and from the curious eyes inside the ballroom. Alexander stood with his back to her, gripping the stone railing with white knuckles, his shoulders rigid with tension that seemed to radiate outward like heat. For several moments, neither of them spoke, the silence filled with 7 years of hurt and regret and words that had never been said. When Alexander finally turned around, Isabella was shocked by the raw vulnerability in his expression. This was not the controlled businessman who had once commanded boardrooms with ruthless efficiency. This was a man who looked like he had been turned inside out, every defense stripped away by the sight of 2 children who carried his face and his eyes and the potential for a relationship he had thrown away before it could begin. "How long have you known?" he asked, and his voice was hoarse with emotion. "How long have you been raising my children alone?" Isabella felt anger surge through her chest like wildfire, 7 years of suppressed pain and exhaustion and fierce protective love crystallizing into fury that took her breath away with its intensity. "Your children," she repeated, her voice deadly quiet in the way that had always made Mateo and Marisol stop whatever they were doing and pay attention. "Your children, Alexander? Where exactly were you when I was throwing up every morning for 4 months? Where were you when I went into labor at 2 in the morning with no one to drive me to the hospital except my terrified mother? Where were you when Mateo had pneumonia at 6 months old and I spent 3 days in the pediatric ward afraid I was going to lose him?" Alexander flinched as if each question was a physical blow, but Isabella was just getting started. 7 years of swallowed anger, of loneliness and exhaustion and the bone-deep weariness that came with carrying every burden alone, poured out of her like water from a broken dam. Where were you when Marisol took her first steps, or when Mateo learned to read, or when they both cried themselves to sleep asking why they didn't have a daddy like the other kids at school? Isabella's voice was rising despite her efforts to keep it controlled, years of suppressed emotion finally finding voice. "They are my children, Alexander. I earned the title through midnight feedings and doctor visits and working 3 jobs to keep them fed and clothed and safe. You forfeited any claim to them the day you demanded I choose between my baby and your precious reputation." Alexander's face went white, and Isabella could see him struggling to find words that could possibly bridge the chasm his choices had created between them. "Isabella, please let me explain." "Explain what?" Isabella shot back, her eyes blazing with the kind of maternal fury that could move mountains. "Explain how you were so terrified of what people might think that you were willing to destroy an innocent life. Explain how you threw away everything we had together because your board of directors mattered more to you than the woman you claimed to love." It wasn't like that, Alexander said desperately, taking a step toward her before stopping when he saw the warning in her posture. "Isabella, I was terrified. I was 31 years old and I had never felt anything like what I felt for you, and when you told me you were pregnant, I panicked. I knew my father would have disinherited me, that the board would have used it as an excuse to push me out, that everything I had worked for would have been destroyed." Isabella stared at him, seeing not the powerful CEO but a man who had allowed fear to make the most important decision of his life. "So you chose your inheritance over your child. You chose your company over your family. You chose your reputation over love." "I chose wrong," Alexander said, his voice breaking on the words. "Isabella, I chose wrong, and I have regretted it every single day for 7 years." The admission hung between them, raw and honest and completely inadequate to heal the wounds it had taken years to inflict. Isabella felt some of her anger deflate, replaced by a bone-deep weariness that came from carrying pain for so long it had become part of her identity. "Regret doesn't change anything, Alexander," she said quietly. "Regret doesn't pay for doctor visits or school supplies or the hundreds of nights I stayed up worried about money. Regret doesn't answer a 7-year-old's questions about why their father doesn't love them enough to be part of their lives." Alexander's hands clenched into fists at his sides, and Isabella could see him struggling with emotions he had probably never allowed himself to fully experience. "They ask about me?" "They used to," Isabella replied, and her voice carried a sadness that cut deeper than her anger had. "When they were younger, they would see other families at the park, fathers pushing their children on swings or teaching them to ride bikes, and they would ask where their daddy was. I told them that sometimes grown-ups make mistakes that hurt the people they love, and that their father wasn't ready to be part of our family." "What do they think now?" Alexander asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Isabella met his eyes steadily, seeing the pain her honesty was causing but refusing to soften the truth for his comfort. "They've stopped asking. They've learned to accept that they only have one parent, and they've built their happiness around what they have instead of mourning what they don't have." The words hit Alexander like physical blows, and Isabella watched him absorb the full weight of what his choices had cost not just her, but the children who had paid the price for his fear and selfishness. "I want to know them," Alexander said suddenly, desperately, his composure completely shattered. "Isabella, please, I want to be part of their lives. I want to try to make up for the time I've lost, the birthdays I've missed, the milestones I wasn't there for." Isabella felt her heart clench with a mixture of old pain and protective fear. "It's not that simple, Alexander. You can't just decide you want to be a father now that it's convenient for you. They're not possessions you can claim when the mood strikes you. They're children with their own feelings and needs and opinions about what they want their lives to look like." "I know that," Alexander said, running his hands through his hair in a gesture so reminiscent of Matteo that Isabella's breath caught in her throat. "I know I have no right to ask this of you, no right to expect forgiveness or second chances. But Isabella, seeing them tonight, seeing how beautiful and brilliant they are, seeing myself in their faces, I can't walk away again. I won't survive it this time." Isabella studied his face, looking for signs of the calculating businessman who had once broken her heart, but finding only raw honesty and desperate hope. This was not the same man who had demanded she choose between her child and his world. This was someone who had been fundamentally changed by the sight of what he had lost, who was finally understanding the true cost of the choices he had made. "What exactly are you asking me, Alexander?" Isabella asked quietly. Alexander took a deep breath, and when he spoke, his voice carried the humility of a man who knew he was asking for something he had no right to expect. "I'm asking for a chance to know my children. I'm asking for the opportunity to prove that I can be the father they deserve, even if it's 7 years later than it should have been. I'm asking you to let me try to earn their love, and maybe someday to earn your forgiveness." Isabella felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, 7 years of buried pain and exhaustion and desperate loneliness suddenly threatening to overwhelm her carefully maintained composure. "Do you have any idea what you're asking of me? Do you understand what it cost me to walk away from you 7 years ago? How hard I've worked to build a life that doesn't include you?" "I'm beginning to," Alexander said, his voice rough with emotion. "Isabella, I've spent 7 years trying to convince myself that I made the right choice, that business and reputation were more important than love and family. But I've been miserable. I've built an empire that feels empty, achieved success that means nothing, surrounded myself with people who admire my money but don't know my heart." He paused, looking out at the rain falling over Central Park, and when he continued, his voice was barely audible. "I think about you every day. I wonder what you're doing, whether you're happy, whether you kept the baby. I've picked up the phone to call you 100 times, but I never knew what I could possibly say that would make up for what I did to you." Isabella felt her heart crack open, all the carefully constructed walls she had built around her feelings for Alexander crumbling in the face of his raw honesty. She had imagined this conversation countless times over the years, had rehearsed angry speeches and bitter accusations, but she had never prepared for this. Genuine remorse, heartfelt apology, and the kind of vulnerability she had never seen from him even in their most intimate moments. "Alexander," she said softly, his name carrying 7 years of buried love and carefully guarded hope. "I know I don't deserve it," he continued, his eyes finding hers and holding them with desperate intensity. "I know I threw away the best thing that ever happened to me, and I know that asking for a second chance is selfish and probably impossible. But Isabella, those children in there, our children, they're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen, and I would give anything for the chance to be part of their lives." Isabella closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the decision she was being asked to make. 7 years ago, she had chosen her unborn child over the man she loved. Now that same man was asking her to choose again, not between him and their children, but between protection and possibility, between safety and the chance of the family she had once dreamed they could be. When she opened her eyes, Alexander was watching her with the kind of desperate hope that reminded her of Matteo when he was asking for something he wasn't sure he would get, or Marisol when she was trying to solve a puzzle that seemed just beyond her reach. "They don't know who you are," Isabella said finally. "They don't know that the man they just met is their father." Alexander nodded, understanding the weight of what she was telling him. "What do they think about not having a father in their lives?" Isabella's expression softened slightly, thinking of her children's resilience and the way they had learned to find joy in the family they had rather than mourning the family they lacked. "They're remarkable kids, Alexander. They're kind and brilliant and funny, and they've learned to be happy with what they have. But sometimes I catch them watching other families at the park, or they'll ask questions about genetics in school and wonder why they have blue eyes when mine are brown." "They have my eyes," Alexander said, wonder evident in his voice. "They have a lot of your traits," Isabella admitted. "Matteo has your determination and your way of running his hand through his hair when he's thinking. Marisol has your ability to focus completely on something when it interests her, and she approaches problems the same methodical way you do." Alexander's face crumpled with emotion, and Isabella could see him struggling to absorb the reality of what he had missed, the years of development and growth and personality formation that he would never be able to witness or be part of. Would it be possible for me to spend some time with them?" he asked hesitantly. "Just to get to know them, to let them get to know me? I don't want to confuse them or make things difficult for you, but Isabella, I need them to know that they have a father who wants to be part of their lives, even if I was too stupid and scared to realize it 7 years ago." Isabella studied his face, seeing the genuine love and longing there, the desperate desire to connect with the children he had never known. But she also saw the same intensity that had once drawn her to him, the same focus and determination that could be overwhelming in its intensity. "This isn't about you, Alexander," she said firmly. "This isn't about your guilt or your regrets or your need to make amends. If I agree to this, if I let you into their lives, it has to be about what's best for Matteo and Marisol. They have to come first, always." "I understand," Alexander said immediately. "Isabella, they will always come first. I swear to you, I will never do anything to hurt them or confuse them or make them feel unwanted. I want the chance to love them the way I should have from the beginning." Isabella felt her resolve wavering, seeing not the ruthless businessman who had once broken her heart, but a man who was finally understanding what really mattered, who was willing to humble himself completely for the chance to know his children. "They would have to meet you gradually," she said slowly, the words feeling like stepping off a cliff into unknown territory. "No sudden revelations, no dramatic announcements. They would need time to get to know you as a person before they could understand who you really are to them." Alexander nodded eagerly, hope beginning to bloom in his expression. "Whatever you think is best. Whatever timeline you're comfortable with. And if at any point I feel like this is too much for them, if I see any sign that your presence is causing them confusion or pain, it stops immediately," Isabella continued, her voice carrying the steel of absolute maternal authority. "No arguments, no negotiations. My priority is their well-being, not your feelings." "Of course," Alexander agreed without hesitation. "Isabella, I would never want to do anything that might hurt them." Isabella looked at him for a long moment, searching his face for any sign of the calculating businessman who had once put reputation ahead of love, but finding only genuine emotion and desperate hope. This was a gamble, she knew, a risk that could backfire in ways that might hurt her children, but it was also a chance for them to know their father, to have the complete family she had once dreamed of giving them. "We should go back inside," she said finally. "They'll be wondering where we are." Alexander's face lit up with cautious joy, understanding that her willingness to return to their children together was as close to agreement as she was prepared to give in this moment. When they walked back into the ballroom, Isabella immediately spotted Matteo and Marisol exactly where she had left them, engaged in animated conversation with Rebecca Martinez about their school's spring science fair. Both children looked up as their parents approached, their faces brightening with a kind of uncomplicated joy that reminded Isabella why every sacrifice had been worth it. "Mama!" Marisol called out, running to Isabella with the kind of enthusiasm that made her heart swell. "Mrs. Martinez says she knows about volcanoes, and we were telling her about our project with baking soda and vinegar. And she said that real volcanoes are much bigger and more dangerous," Matteo added, his eyes shining with the excitement that always accompanied his discovery of new information. "Did you know that some volcanoes are so big they can change the weather all around the world?" Isabella knelt down to hug both children, breathing in their familiar scent and feeling grounded by their warmth and energy. "That's fascinating, baby. Did you thank Mrs. Martinez for teaching you new things?" Both children immediately turned to Rebecca with the kind of polite gratitude Isabella had worked hard to instill in them, their manners impeccable despite their excitement. Alexander stood slightly apart from this family tableau, watching the interaction with an expression of wonder and longing that made Isabella's heart ache. She could see him trying to memorize every detail, every gesture and expression, as if he was afraid this might be his only chance to observe his children in their natural state. "Mr. Alexander," Marisol said suddenly, her attention turning to the tall man who had been watching them so intently. "Do you have children too?" The innocent question hit Alexander like a physical blow, and Isabella watched him struggle to find an answer that was both honest and appropriate for a 7-year-old's understanding. Not exactly," he said carefully, his voice thick with emotion. "But I hope someday I might get to spend time with some very special children." "That would be nice," Matteo said with the kind of generous spirit that made Isabella proud every single day. "Children are fun, even when they're sometimes loud or messy. Mama says everyone deserves to have people who love them." Alexander's face crumpled slightly, and Isabella could see him fighting to maintain his composure in the face of such innocent wisdom from the son he had never known. "Your mama is a very smart woman," Alexander managed to say. "You're very lucky to have her." "We know," Marisol said matter-of-factly. "She's the best mama in the whole world. She works really hard to take care of us, and she reads us stories every night, and she makes the best pancakes on Saturday mornings." Isabella felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, overwhelmed by her children's faith in her, by their ability to find joy and security in the life she had built for them despite all its imperfections and struggles. Alexander looked at Isabella with an expression of such profound respect and admiration that it took her breath away. "She sounds like the most wonderful mother any children could ask for," he said quietly. As the evening wound down and other guests began to make their departures, Isabella found herself in the strange position of navigating social pleasantries with a man who had once been her entire world and was now— what exactly? The father of her children, certainly, But beyond that, she wasn't sure how to categorize their relationship or what role he might play in their future. "Isabella," Alexander said quietly as she gathered the twins' coats and prepared to leave. Would it be possible for me to see them again? Maybe somewhere less formal, where we could just talk." Isabella looked at her children, who were tired but happy after their adventure in the grown-up world, and felt the weight of the decision she was making on their behalf. "There's a park near our apartment," she said slowly. "Matteo and Marisol like to go there on Sunday afternoons to feed the ducks." Alexander's face lit up with hope and gratitude that was almost painful to witness. Would it be all right if I joined you this Sunday? Just as a friend?" Isabella nodded, knowing that she was crossing a line that could never be uncrossed, that she was opening a door that had been firmly closed for 7 years. "We usually get there around 2 o'clock. "I'll be there," Alexander promised, his voice carrying the kind of solemn commitment usually reserved for business contracts and legal documents. As Isabella helped Matteo and Marisol into their coats and prepared to leave the Plaza Hotel, she caught Alexander watching them with an expression of such longing and regret that it made her chest tight with sympathy she wasn't sure she was ready to feel. "Alexander," she said quietly, waiting until she had his full attention, "this doesn't change anything between us. I'm doing this for them, because they deserve the chance to know their father. But you need to understand that earning their love, earning their trust, that's going to take time. And earning my forgiveness, that might take even longer." Alexander nodded, understanding evident in his expression. "I know. Isabella, I know I have no right to ask this of you, and I know that I may never be able to make up for the time I've lost or the pain I've caused. But I promise you, I will spend every day trying to prove that I can be the father they deserve and the man you should have been able to count on from the beginning." Isabella looked at him for a long moment, seeing not the calculating businessman who had once broken her heart, but a man who was finally beginning to understand what really mattered, who was willing to humble himself completely for the chance to be part of his children's lives. As they walked out of the Plaza Hotel into the cool spring night, Matteo and Marisol chattering excitedly about their adventure at the fancy grown-up party, Isabella found herself cautiously hopeful for the first time in 7 years. Maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late for second chances. Maybe love really could conquer fear, and maybe their family could finally become what it was always meant to be. The taxi ride home was filled with the twins' excited recounting of their evening, their voices overlapping as they described the crystal chandeliers and fancy dresses and the nice man who had seemed so interested in hearing about their school projects. "Mama," Marisol said as Isabella tucked her into bed that night, her voice sleepy but thoughtful, "do you think that man will really come to the park on Sunday?" Isabella smoothed her daughter's hair back from her forehead, marveling at the intuition that seemed to run in the Drake family genes. "I think he will, sweetheart. Would you like him to?" Marisol considered this with the kind of serious contemplation she brought to all important decisions. "I think so. He seemed lonely, like maybe he needs some friends. And Matteo liked him too." Isabella kissed her daughter's forehead, her heart full of love and hope and the kind of cautious optimism that came with the possibility of dreams she had long ago given up on finally coming true. Sunday afternoon arrived bright and clear, with a kind of spring sunshine that made Central Park look like a painting come to life. Isabella had spent the morning in a state of nervous energy, changing clothes 3 times before settling on jeans and a simple sweater that struck the right balance between casual and presentable. Matteo and Marisol, sensing their mother's unusual anxiety, had peppered her with questions about why she seemed worried and whether everything was all right. Isabella had deflected their concerns with the practiced ease of a mother who had learned to shield her children from adult complications, but she could see them exchanging meaningful glances in the way twins did when they sensed secrets in the air. Alexander was already at the park when they arrived, sitting on a bench near the duck pond with a kind of rigid posture that suggested he was as nervous as Isabella felt. He had clearly made an effort to dress casually, but even in jeans and a polo shirt, he carried himself with the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to command. "Mr. Alexander." Matteo called out, running ahead with the fearless enthusiasm that characterized his approach to life. "You came. Did you bring any bread for the ducks?" Alexander's face transformed with genuine joy at the sight of the children, and Isabella was struck by how different he looked when he smiled, how the harsh lines of constant business pressure seemed to soften when he was focused on something that truly mattered to him. I did, Alexander said, producing a bag of duck-appropriate food from his jacket pocket. Though I have to admit, I had to ask the person at the pet store what ducks like to eat. I've never fed ducks before. That's okay, Marisol assured him with a kind of generous patience she usually reserved for adults who needed help understanding kid logic. We can teach you. Ducks are pretty easy, but you have to throw the food into the water, not at the ducks, because hitting them would hurt their feelings. Alexander nodded solemnly, as if he was receiving crucial business intelligence instead of duck-feeding instructions from a 7-year-old. I'll remember that. Thank you for teaching me. For the next hour, Isabella watched in amazement as Alexander allowed himself to be thoroughly educated in the intricacies of duck behavior, park etiquette, and the complex social dynamics of the playground. Mateo and Marisol appointed themselves as his guides to the world of childhood, showing him the best spots for feeding ducks, the proper technique for skipping stones, and the elaborate rules that govern the various playground equipment. What struck Isabella most was Alexander's complete attention to everything the children said and did. This was not the distracted tolerance adults sometimes showed to children's chatter, but genuine interest and engagement. He asked thoughtful questions, remembered details from their earlier conversations, and seemed to find their 7-year-old perspectives on life both fascinating and delightful. Mr. Alexander, Marisol said as they sat on a blanket Isabella had brought, sharing a picnic lunch of sandwiches and fruit, what kind of work do you do? Isabella held her breath, wondering how Alexander would explain his business empire to children who had no concept of corporate hierarchies or billion-dollar deals. I help companies make important decisions about money, Alexander said simply. It's kind of like when you have to decide whether to spend your allowance on a toy or save it for something bigger later. I help grown-ups with much bigger versions of those kinds of choices. That sounds complicated, Mateo observed. Do you like it? Alexander paused, clearly considering how to answer honestly without burdening the children with adult complexities. I used to think I did, he said finally. But lately, I've been wondering if I should spend more time on things that make me happy instead of just things that make me successful. What makes you happy? Marisol asked with a direct curiosity that had no patience for social niceties. Alexander looked at both children, then at Isabella, his expression soft with wonder and something that looked like discovery. Spending time with people I care about. Learning about things that matter to them. Maybe teaching someone to feed ducks for the first time. Isabella felt her heart clench with emotion, seeing the genuine transformation taking place in Alexander as he allowed himself to experience the simple joy of being with his children. This was not the calculating businessman who had once viewed love as a luxury he couldn't afford, but a man who was rediscovering what it meant to find happiness in connection rather than achievement. As the afternoon progressed, Isabella found herself relaxing in ways she hadn't expected. Watching Alexander with Mateo and Marisol felt natural, right, as if this was how their family had always been meant to function. The children clearly adored their new adult friend, competing for his attention and including him in their games with a generous acceptance that came naturally to them. When it came time to leave, both twins hugged Alexander goodbye with the same enthusiasm they showed their favorite relatives, and Isabella was touched to see him kneel down to their level, giving them the kind of full attention that made children feel heard and valued. Can Mr. Alexander come back next Sunday? Mateo asked as they walked toward the park exit. I want to show him the really good climbing tree, and maybe teach him how to play our version of hide and seek. We'll see, Isabella said, the phrase that every parent used when they needed time to think about requests that were both simple and impossibly complicated. As Alexander walked with them toward the subway entrance, he seemed reluctant to let the afternoon end, lingering with a kind of hesitation that suggested he wasn't sure when or if he would see them again. Isabella, he said quietly, while the children were distracted by a street performer with a guitar. Thank you. For today, for giving me this chance. I know it wasn't easy for you. Isabella looked at him, seeing not the man who had once broken her heart, but the father who had spent the afternoon delighting in his children's company, who had allowed them to teach him about ducks and park rules and the importance of sharing snacks equally. They like you, she said simply. And that's what matters. Alexander's face lit up with hope and gratitude that made Isabella's chest tight with emotion she wasn't ready to name. Does that mean, could we do this again? Isabella nodded, making a decision that felt both terrifying and inevitable. Sunday afternoons. Same time, same place. But Alexander. I know, he said quickly. I know this is about them, not me. I know I have to earn this, and I know it might take a long time. It will take a long time, Isabella confirmed. But yes, we can do this again. As Alexander held his children for the first time, really held them, kneeling on the sidewalk outside Central Park while they hugged him goodbye, Isabella realized that money could buy everything except the love he had nearly lost forever. But perhaps, just perhaps, it wasn't too late to earn it back. The subway ride home was filled with the twins' excited planning for next Sunday's adventures, their voices overlapping as they discussed all the things they wanted to show Mr. Alexander and teach him about their world. Isabella listened to their chatter with a heart that was cautiously, carefully beginning to hope that maybe, just maybe, they were all finally ready to become the family they were always meant to be.